have got a great program here in 2026 of speakers for you at the Broomfield Veterans Museum Coffee and Conversation Series. And I'll give you a little teaser for some of that here in a minute. We have a great speaker today, Bruce Kirschner, who's going to be talking about his father, who was a mess cook in the 4th Infantry Division during World War II. Quite the story here that you're going to hear about today. But before we get to that, a couple of things that we wanted to remind folks about, a couple of little announcements here. We do want to thank all of our members, all of our donors, and especially those people who have made a wonderful donation of donuts for the last couple of Coffee and Conversations. Lamar's in Louisville has been doing this for the last couple of Coffee and Conversations. We hope they continue to do it. We encourage you, obviously, if you like their donuts, go buy their donuts. So that's my little plug for them. Another one is Veterans Life Magazine. We have a great relationship with the editors of Veterans Life Magazine. This magazine is published out of Loveland, and they do great stories all the time. A lot of contributors, such as our very own Flint Whitlock over there. A lot of articles, history, veteran stories. Really corresponds with our mission here at the museum, so we have a good relationship with them. Couple of reminders, if you would please make sure that you have signed into the visitors logs. We have 2 logbooks, one upstairs, one down here. And if for some reason you forgot to do that when you came in today, just do it on your way out. We do like to keep a tab of people who come in and out of the museum, and those of you in the audience who participate here with our Coffee and Conversation. If you'll silence or turn off your cell phone, that's always just a courtesy for our speaker. We do encourage you to become a museum member. And you can talk to any of us here in the red vests or the blue vests, anybody here who is a volunteer, about how to become a volunteer or how to become a museum member or anything you want to do. Donations, volunteering your time. We appreciate all of that. Because remember, your donations do make this museum possible. We have our exhibits upstairs that some of you may wish to go see after the talk today. Our current exhibit in our forefathers section is the end of World War II and the Pacific War. Great exhibit up there. We've got a 10-foot long model of the battleship Missouri, I think it is, right? The Missouri, yeah. Incredible. I mean, it's almost the size of a canoe. So you could probably float that thing and sit on it in the water somewhere. And then we have our very own Noah Webb's wonderful artwork up in our artillery exhibit, stuff that he painted during his service in Vietnam. And these are some incredible oil paintings up there that captured his time and his service stories. So encourage you to take a look at those. Quick announcement, and then we're going to hear from our president here. Wanted to let people know that today I brought a whole bunch of survey forms, and we at the museum would like to get your input, since a lot of you are familiar faces and some of you are new. But we'd like to see what you would like to see this year and next coming years for Coffee and Conversation speakers and topics. So you'll notice on this form there's a variety of topics here. Circle all of those or any of those that you would like to continue to see the museum bring here as speakers and as subjects. And it also has a spot at the bottom that says any suggestions that you have as well. Any suggestions for speakers if they aren't on there, or topics, or just anything. Maybe there's some way you want to see the talks done differently or whatever. But we're willing to take any sort of input you have, and we'll take that under consideration. So we're going to leave this here. There's a box and some pencils. And after the talk today, I would appreciate if you'd fill one of these out and drop it in the box on your way out of here, and we'll get your input. Also, if you'd like to speak, if you have a subject or a topic or your story, if you are a veteran yourself, or if you have a family member who is a veteran, you like to share their story, and this is something you'd like to share with us, please sign up. We would love to have you. We schedule our speakers pretty much kind of months in advance, so you have plenty of time if that's something you want to prepare for, and we'd love to hear from you. So this will be available as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over briefly to our president. John here is going to tell you about something coming up.
Good morning. Happy New Year. My name is John Pedicolis. I'm the current president of the board here at the museum. And a couple things coming up I wanted to mention to everybody. First of all, we have our next Saturday, we have our annual meeting, membership meeting. And the membership will be gathering right here in the presentation room. We'll have breakfast at 9 and the meeting will go off at 10. So if you all are an annual, or if you are a membership of the museum, please come. We'll be voting on the budget for next year. We'll be voting on new directors, and we'll be voting on officers of the board. So if you're a member, please attend. I'd like to talk about a few exhibits that we're going to have coming up, hopefully in the next 6 months at least. A couple things are still being reconditioned. We were donated, a gentleman in Boulder, Bob Euler, acquired the Colonel Slow coat and cap, Kippy. That is, Colonel Slow, if you know any history here, is the colonel in charge of the volunteers that marched south in 1862 and intercepted the Confederates coming from Texas at the Battle of Glorieta Pass. And we have his actual colonel coat. We'll have that put on display, and his cap. And as a result of that, we're going to kind of remodel the Civil War room to accommodate those display items. So we're looking forward to that in the next 6 months. Also, we have just, this has been a project for about 2 years. If you're familiar with the museum, you'll notice that we have some albums just paged through in the Civil War room honoring veterans. In the past, you could donate money and you could put in your ancestor, your father, your grandfather, who happened to be a veteran, and his biography in these albums. Last 2 years, we've had a project to make that an electronic honor board. And that has come to fruition. We now have the electronic board. It's beautiful. I can't show it to you today because we're having it measured and fitted for a kiosk to put it up in the Civil War room. But it's going to be a really amazing thing. It's all cross-referenced between service, between campaigns, so service, conflicts, name, and you'll be able to punch on it, and for a mere $100 donation, you can put your father, grandfather, or yourself in the electronic honor board. So it ought to be a really, really great addition to the museum. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
All right. And thank you, John. And yes, along with what John was sharing with us this year, we're going to be taking a very close look at, of course, the 150th anniversary of Colorado's statehood. So we're going to have some really interesting Colorado history-specific items coming up here for exhibit. As John mentioned, the Colonel Slow exhibit, kind of a remodeling of Colorado in the Civil War upstairs. And then we're going to tie that in with some speakers, too. We're going to have some great coffee and conversation speakers. If you are interested in Colorado history, we should have quite a few of those coming up. So a couple of speakers that you might have seen there on the screen in the next couple of weeks. Definitely encourage you to come, and it should be a great year for coffee and conversation, and 2026 should be a great year for the museum. That's the way we're looking at it. Lots of changes, lots of great changes going on. With that said, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Mr. Bruce Kirschner, right over here. Bruce is going to fill us in on an incredible story about his father and what he did during World War II. So, Bruce, if your microphone is on, make sure it's on. I'll turn it over to you, sir. Go ahead. Give him a hand, Bruce Kirschner.
Thanks, Don. I guess we're all set to go with all these. Okay, cool. Hi, good morning. As you know, my name is Bruce Kirschner. Thanks to the Broomfield Veterans Museum for having me in here today, and thanks to all of you for coming in here. I noticed I've stacked about a third of the room with people I know. So thanks to all my friends that have come. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up just east of New York City. You can probably tell from my accent. I never lost my New York accent. Even though I've lived in the Rocky Mountain West for most of my life. My wife and I moved here in 1981. We've been living in Louisville since 1986. We raised our 3 sons there. I'm now 72 years old. I've never served in the military, just so you know, and I've been retired since 2012. Okay, first a little bit about my dad. He was drafted almost a full year before Pearl Harbor. He went right into L Company, an Army rifleman company, and served as a reconnaissance unit for the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division's 8th Regiment. He served there for the duration of the war and was honorably discharged in September 1945. And the 4th Infantry Division is often referred to as 4ID, and I'll be using that term today, 4ID, 4th Infantry Division, or the Ivy Division. It goes by a number of different names, so I'll be using that interchangeably. Here's the first photo I ever saw of my dad. My dad got, after the war, this book. This is the original book. It was like a kind of a souvenir book for, I guess, the survivors of his unit. But if you notice, he's in the top row, 3rd from the left. He's the guy with the biggest smile. And my dad, he was quite a character. I don't know, I think he was like joking with the photographer in this photo. But if you look at the other photos, most of these guys are serious, very few guys who smiles. But that's what I would see in the basement of my house when I was a kid. I was just really curious about what was this all about, my dad being in the war. And it's not something he talked about. One thing I should tell you about my dad was, something to keep in mind this whole presentation. My dad was a real straight shooter. He didn't make stuff up. He didn't lie. He didn't exaggerate. If it came out of my dad's mouth, you could bet your life on it. So a lot of what I'll be talking about today is based on interviews that I did with my dad when I was an adult. When I was a kid growing up in the 60s, this is me and my dad, summer 1961, I can remember asking my dad often about his Army experience during World War II, and he narrowed the discussion about his cooking. He was the mess sergeant. He was very proud of his cooking, but he didn't really want to talk about anything else. And when I was a kid, I would ask him to take me to war movies. You know, as a kid, you know, we grew up in the shadow in the 60s and 50s, World War II. We wanted to be like Army men and wanted to go to war movies. He never wanted to take me to a war movie. He always like demurred, said, I don't think I want to do that. I never quite really understood what that was about. But I knew he didn't like watching anything violent on TV. So it wasn't until later in life when he attended his first 4th Infantry Division National Reunion in Colorado Springs in 1976, where he started to talk more freely about the war. And that's when I started interviewing him. Soon after that, probably in the 1980s, I started to interview him. I interviewed him on audio tape and then videotape. And I realized now that the reason he went to a lot of these reunions was my dad was suffering from post-traumatic stress. And it's not something it wasn't really evident, but by hanging out with guys from his company, he could talk to him, it brought peace to his soul. So anyway, my mom and my dad went to all the reunions later in life, but it's not something he did early on. So I did these audio and video tapes with him, and he basically said, my Army years were the best years of my life. And if I was to do it again, I would have stayed in the Army. I would have made a career out of it. And when I was much older, he said, yeah, I would have never gotten married, and I would have never had kids. And that was another thing about my dad. He had no filters. He wasn't thinking, I'm talking to my son now, you know. But I saw my whole life before my eyes, you know. Okay, so just kind of a heads up. This is what I want to talk about today. How many people have heard of the 4th Infantry Division? Raise your hand. Okay, good. I want to talk about how he became mess sergeant. I think that's an interesting story. And then a little more detail about them landing on D-Day and their advance to Germany. And the focus, I think, of this whole presentation is my dad's cooking. I really want to honor him because he spent a lot of time telling me how he operated much differently than other Army kitchens on the front. And I'll go into good detail on what he was talking about. And then I met a number of the men from L Company, so I want to talk about them. A number of these guys were won Silver Stars, you know, certainly Purple Hearts. Talk about them. And then some other famous people that were connected to the 4th Infantry Division during World War II. And then later, after my dad died, I visited a cemetery in Joplin, Maryland. I'll explain that. And then I went to Normandy. And I got a chance to visit the grave sites of his friends and his commander. And then my dad post-World War II, you know, what he did, and just talk about his life. So, okay. All right, here's a quick biographical outline of my dad. He's second-generation American. Both his parents were born in southern Poland. He came here, my grandfather came here in 1898. He was the scout. He was the oldest of 10 surviving children of his family in southern Poland. And his parents said, we want you to go to the United States, check it out. If it's good, we'll come. So my grandfather, who was 18 at the time, eventually brought over his whole family. But my dad was the youngest of 5 children. He was raised in Brooklyn, New York, and the whole family was involved in food service. My grandfather, his father, had a horse and buggy. He had a little grocery shop. He sold eggs and dairy stuff. And then later he had his own butcher shop in southern Brooklyn. And that's when my dad started working. So that's really all my dad ever really knew. So at age 23, my dad gets drafted. It's February 1941. And here's, I found this registration certificate from October 1940, where he signed up. This is his registration card, his selective service registration card. That's in my dad's handwriting. Another thing that was interesting was I went back to old newspapers. The major newspaper in Brooklyn at the time was the Brooklyn Eagle. And early on in the war, they had a page where they listed all the inductees. And I found my dad's name. He's third from the top. Third one down, Arthur Kirschner. So I thought that was pretty cool. I think later on during the war, there were so many, especially after the attack on Pearl Harbor, so many men were being drafted. I don't think they did this in the newspaper anymore. So it's kind of interesting to find this. Okay, here's kind of a snapshot of my dad's Army service. Already told you he registered in October. He was inducted in February. He left. It's all right.
My favorite girl from Spam.
Oh, really? Just throw it out. Just put. There's a garbage over there. He departed for the UK after being in the States for a number of years, and then he came back to the U.S. in '45. Discharged in September of '45. So in terms of service time, I added it all up. He spent over 3 years in the United States, stateside, in different 4th Infantry Division bases, mostly in the South. And then after he went to Europe, he was there for about almost a year and a half. And his total time in the military was 4 years and 6 months. When I was growing up, most of my friends had dads who were in the military during World War II, but I never met any of them whose dad was in longer than my dad. I think very few men were in World War II longer than my dad. 4 years, 6 months, if they were not career. Okay? Okay, so here's where he was. Stateside, did his basic training at Fort Benning, and then he went to Camp Gordon in Augusta, Georgia, went back up to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then down to Camp Gordon Johnson in Florida. They did a lot of amphibious training in the States, where they knew they were going to be attacking Europe, so they got him out on the water in boats, and so there was a lot of that going on with their training. And then they ended up at Fort Jackson before going back to Fort Dix, and then they left for England. When he was in Europe, he trained mostly in southwestern UK, in Exeter, around Devonshire, England, and then his unit landed at D-Day in France, and then they went to Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany. And I'll go into more detail on this a little later.
His unit landed on D-Day. Did he land on D-Day?
No, he did not, and I'll explain that. He was a support guy, so they held him back. Yeah, right, right. Good point. So now a little bit about 4th Infantry Division. They've got this, in fact, this uniform, I should point out, this is their patch. It's the Ivy League, and it's one of the few times where the Army had some frivolity, where they said this represents the number 4, and the Roman numeral 4 is like this, right? IV. So 5 or IV became their patch, which and I guess I didn't know this when I did my research. The ivy plant, which that represents, symbolizes tenacity and fidelity, which ties directly to their division motto, which is steadfast and loyal. And I would hear a lot of this when I was growing up. Here's kind of a quick overview of the 4th Infantry Division. They were launched in December 1917. They fought in France during World War I, World War II, D-Day, Liberation of Paris, Battle of the Bulge. I didn't list this here. I'll go into more detail on the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. How many of you have heard about the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest? Okay. And then Vietnam, they were deployed in the Central Highlands from 66 to 70. Modern era, as you probably know, they were in Iraq. They were the ones that discovered Saddam Hussein. They captured him. And today they're at Fort Carson. And they've been there most of the last 30 years, I think. They were at Fort Hood for a while. But most of the time they've been at Fort Carson. Okay. When I recorded interviews with my dad, one of my first questions for my dad was, how did you become a mess sergeant? And he told me that although he had tested high on the test for officer training school, he turned it down. He said, I don't want to go to officer training school. I want to be a cook. He says, that's what I'm most trained for. So let me just kind of read what he said. He said, one day they made an announcement that they needed a couple of volunteers to go to cooks and baker school. I volunteered and went to Army cooking school for 2 months. Baking school for another month was optional. I volunteered for that. I felt I would do very well as a cook because I had meat cutting experience in his dad's butcher shop, which was very beneficial to being a cook. At that time, we used to get our meat in what they call primal cuts, or whole pieces of meat, sides of beef. A lot of cooks didn't know how to cut it up. All they did was rip it apart the best way they could, and all they made was meatloaf or beef stew. They didn't have any meat cutting experience. I did, which was beneficial. For several months, I was the first cook, and I had a mess sergeant over me. He wasn't a bad cook, but he was not an administrator. Like, I would take the menu, which we were supplied with every day. If you could improve on the menu, good. But if you had to at least, you had to at least serve what they had on the menu. I would collaborate with the mess sergeant. I would tell my mess sergeant, let's serve this and let's do that. And I was telling him what to do. So one day, he went to the commanding officer and told him, I think Kirschner would make a better mess sergeant than me. He's a good administrator. I like to cook. I'll be a cook under him. So the company commander went to my dad. In fact, I don't even think his mess sergeant told my dad. I don't think he said, I'm going to go talk to the company commander and make you the mess sergeant. I think he just went to the company commander, talked to him, and then the company commander came to my dad and said, I'm making you mess sergeant. And then all of a sudden, my dad's mess sergeant. And my dad took that job really, really seriously. Okay. So all right. Here's my dad in uniform, taking one of the stateside Army bases. I don't know which base it was, before he left for Europe. And Dad, he told me a little bit about his battalion and how they were set up. He says, we're comprised of a headquarters company, we had 3 rifle companies, and a heavy weapons company, and they made us the 4th Recon. There had been a motorized division, and they dismantled that. They made us the 4th Recon, and we were the reconnaissance battalion for the division. Our job was to reconnoiter, which is to find out where the enemy was. So they would go out and they would probe, and that was what the job they had to do through the war. Okay, thanks to Barry Jerub, who's the son of Leo Jerub, one of the L Company soldiers, for sharing the next few photos. He sent this to me last May. I had never seen these photos before. I have very few photos of my dad during World War II. He didn't have a camera. I don't think many people had a camera on the front. And these pictures were taken stateside. That's my dad in the center. I thought what was fascinating about this photo is my father never played guitar. As far as I know, he never played any musical instrument. So, Dad, what are you doing with that guitar? But he's having a good time, you know? Here's another picture that he sent me. That's my father on the left. He's being sprayed by the hose, which is being watched over by this sergeant. And the back of the photo said, getting back at the mess sergeant. There's my dad. And this photo I find really interesting. I love it. I studied this photo. Check this out. My dad is wearing his white cooking uniform, right? You know, they're at Camp Gordon here. This is a while before they left for England. This guy's playing guitar. Look at this guy. He's wearing a gas mask. But they're all laughing, but my father has his mouth open like he's talking or telling a joke, and this guy's looking at him, you know? So my dad was the life of the party. And I was talking to Don about this. Don says, you always wanted someone who could make you laugh on the front. And that was my dad. He was a real joker. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting, it's my favorite photo. Here he is again. In May of 2019, I got an email from Brian Jerub, the son of an L Company veteran, Leo Jerub. And Brian's the twin brother of Barry, who had sent me those photos. And Brian said in his email to me, he says, I want to introduce myself and give you my dad's impression of Art Kirschner, a name I heard repeated on many occasions. My dad always told me that your dad was the most beloved man in L Company and that he was a fine man. My dad used to joke, sometimes in your dad's presence, that everybody tried to stay on Art's good side because he was the cook. you know, I never really thought about this, but food in the Army, and certainly on the front, is very, very important for the soldiers. And this is a quote from Napoleon Bonaparte. But I found a lot of quotes about the importance of food, and they highlight how the strength, mobility, and success of an army depends heavily on proper nourishment and food support, because it's all about troop energy, morale, and combat readiness, and that food supply was historically viewed as fundamental not only for survival, but as a weapon of war in its own right, determining the endurance and effectiveness of soldiers in battle. And I think my dad recognized that and brought that home. And I think he really did the best job he could. Barry also sent me these photos. These are photos of the L Company men in the mess line. So these are guys that my dad actually cooked for. I think this was stateside. Their dad took the photo. And then here they're eating my dad's food. These guys look reasonably happy eating my dad's food, don't they? I was trying to tell. I mean, they don't look like they're upset, you know. Okay, so after years of training in the States, the division received orders in late 1943 that they were going to Europe. They were deployed to England to get ready for the invasion of Europe. And they were stationed outside Exeter, which is right here. This is where they trained, Devonshire. And they did a lot of amphibious training here on the beach, knowing that they were going to, I don't think they really knew where they were going to land. If they were gonna, I mean, the Nazis thought that the Allies were going to go to Calais. As you know, this is Normandy right here. And then Utah Beach is, I think it's about right here. So he was there from January until June. And, okay, so D-Day landing, let's talk about this. The 4th Infantry Division, specifically the 8th Regiment, my dad's unit, were the first surface-borne unit to land on the beach. As you know, the night before D-Day, they parachuted in, you know, the airborne guys, the 101st. So my dad's unit landed that morning. And you asked about when did my dad land. They held my dad back. They held back all the support people. So they held my dad back with his cooks, his equipment, his trucks. And then once they secured the beach, which was sometime later, my dad landed. When I went to one of the reunions, I heard one of the guys from my dad's unit say, when I got off the boat at Utah Beach, there was nobody in front of me, which was like, whoa. But by 9 o'clock the morning of D-Day, the 4th Infantry Division had cleared off Utah Beach for a 2-mile stretch, got rid of all the resistance. This guy was literally the first guy to step foot on the sand on Normandy Beach. His name was Moose Schroeder. He was from Maryland. He was 25 years old. He headed a regiment. And I don't know if you noticed, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the son of Teddy Roosevelt, was number 2 in command of the 4th Infantry Division. And he went to Moose Schroeder. I guess Moose got sick just before D-Day, and Roosevelt went to him and said, Moose, I want to be on your boat when we land, so you got to get well, get out of here. He rode on the first boat to land at Utah in Normandy with Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. He got shot twice in the arm. He was hospitalized in England, almost had his arm amputated. And according to Schroeder, he said, I knew my company was in the first wave, but I didn't know I was actually going to be the first ashore. Besides, I was too scared to think about it. And he ended up making the Army his career. He retired as a full colonel in 1971, and he died at age 90. But really interesting guy. He looks like a moose, this guy, doesn't he? I don't know how tall this guy was, but okay. So here the landing on Utah Beach at D-Day, the disembarking from the Higgins boat. They had a number of objectives when they hit the beach. The first one was secure the beachhead, land the troops, tanks, supplies, neutralize any German defenses at Utah Beach, and establish a secure area for the continuous flow of reinforcements and equipment so we get the stuff into France. Number two was seize the causeways. The Nazis had flooded that whole area just behind the beach, so it would be much more difficult for the Allies to get through. But there were these causeways. There were 4 narrow raised causeways. So their job, once they got off the beach, was to take control of these primary exits to avoid them being trapped on the beach. Okay, and my dad's unit, the L Company, certainly landed here, all these guys. I don't know how many support people like my dad were left in England. Okay, so here they're trying to scale the seawall on D-Day. So the next 3 objectives were link with the airborne forces. One of the first things they had to do was go inland. The 101st had dropped, and the 82nd Airborne had dropped into St. Miraglisse. I don't know if you saw the movie Longest Day, but they dropped in. Their job was to break these guys out because they were surrounded by the Nazis. So that was one of the first jobs. The next objective was isolate the Cotentin Peninsula, and then the third one was, or the fifth one total, was advance towards Cherbourg. And Cherbourg was kind of northwest of Utah Beach, but it was an important port they needed to control to bring in supplies from England. And it was being controlled by the Germans, so they had to get the Germans out of there. So that was the next one. So they took, the 4th Infantry Division took the critically important port of Cherbourg on June 25th, and they were in continuous action during the period of June 6th to June 28th, when the last resistance around Cherbourg was eliminated. And during this time, they sustained 5,450 casualties and had over 800 men killed. And I'll go more into this later about, they had the highest mortality and casualty rate of any Allied unit in World War II. After they took Cherbourg, they headed east, following an uprising by the the French resistance the day before, on August 25th, 1944. They, along with the French 2nd Armored Division, were the first troops to earn the distinction of liberating Paris after 4 years of Nazi rule. And the 4th Infantry Division passed through town. The Parisians were going wild, and the 4th Infantry Division, they left the victory parade to the following army units because they wanted to stay in close pursuit of the Germans. So they didn't stick around the party. They kept moving. There was a reporter embedded with the 8th Regiment, and he said, and I quote, he said, "As we reached the outskirts of the city, we became aware of a strange noise somewhere ahead of us, a low murmur at first. It gained momentum and built into a gigantic roar of hysterical joy. It was if it was the bottom of the 9th in the 7th game of the World Series. Babe Ruth had smashed the winning homer over center field wall in Yankee Stadium, only it was louder and wilder, hurled from all directions, echoing off buildings, rattling windows, deafening eardrums, and then there burst upon us a wall of humanity. I remember its being mostly female and young, yelling, screaming, waving, cheering, clambering up the sides of the trucks, kissing us, pressing flowers and wine on us. So it was quite a time. 2 weeks later, on September 11, 1944, 4th Infantry Division was the first Allied unit to step foot into Germany. They crossed the Siegfried Line. So, okay. I mentioned this battle of the Hürtgen Forest. A few have ever heard of this battle. This was the only battle that my father ever mentioned to me when I was growing up. And I remember him he didn't say much, but he said, Bruce, war is hell. That was like the worst battle. I never heard of it. And he didn't say much about it, but you knew it was serious. And one of the things that the Germans did, well, let me tell you a little bit more about it. This was mid-November 44. It was the bloodiest battle the 4th Infantry Division ever got involved in. It was considered the most grueling battle in Europe. And interestingly, most people know the Battle of the Birds, Battle of the Bulge. They've heard of that. But very few people I've ever talked to have ever heard about the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest. It was known as the meat grinder. And they fought in the cold rain and snow, and the forest was made of pine and fir trees, 150 feet in height, and the soldiers slogged it out yard by yard, day by day, against a ferocious German artillery and infantry resistance. And the enemy, this is one thing my dad told me. He said we had all these tall trees, and the enemy would deliberately shoot their rockets into the trees so the trees would splinter, and the soldiers on the ground, their bodies would be pierced with wood splinters from the trees that were blown up.
Not rockets, 88 flak guns.
They were flak guns. Okay, all right. So you know better than, 88. So tell us more about that. They're big.
They made an 88 millimeter flak gun that the Germans learned real quickly that they could depress and use it against tanks. And one of the things they did a lot is they shot it into the trees and splintered them up.
It shot into the trees and split them up. Yeah, that's exactly what my dad said. Yeah, I didn't know that type of munitions they were using.
The Hürtgen Forest was real dark.
Real dark, cold, and it was that time of year too. It was like November, December. Okay.
They fought there in World War I.
Yeah, it was tough places to fight. Between November 7th and December 3rd, the 4th Infantry Division lost over 7,000 men. That's about 10 men per company per day over that whole period. And replacements flowed in to compensate for the losses, but the Hürtgen's voracious appetite for casualties was greater than the Army's ability to provide new troops. And Lieutenant George Wilson, the guy who wrote this book, author of If You Survive, he said his company had losses at 167% for enlisted men. He said, we started with a full company of about 162 men and had lost about 287. So they went through replacements like crazy. They kept going through replacements. By early December, the division had fought through what had become a twisted mass of shrapnel-torn stumps and broken trees and had accomplished its mission. Casualties in the Hürtgen Forest exceeded 150% of the original strength of a rifle company. The battle was so costly that it has been described as an Allied, quote, defeat of the first magnitude. The Battle of the Bulge gained widespread press and public attention, leaving this battle less well remembered. Okay, Battle of the Bulge. So they had the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest behind them. The division moved into a defensive position in Luxembourg and was soon engaged in this battle. Patton wrote to Major General Barton during this, or I guess it was afterward. He said, your fight in the Hürtgen Forest was an epic of stark infantry combat, but in my opinion, your most recent fight from the 16th to the 26th of December, when, with a depleted and tired division, you halted the left shoulder of the German thrust into the American lines and saved the city of Luxembourg and the tremendous supply establishments and road nests in that vicinity. It is the most outstanding accomplishment of yourself and your division. And what's interesting with this book is, the title is If You Survive, and it says, so promised George Wilson's World War II commanding officer in the hedgerows of Normandy, and it was to be a promise dramatically fulfilled. It's a great book, tells the story. Okay. Here that they're going, this is Battle of the Bulge. They're running across this Bailey Bridge, that it's called, in Luxembourg on January 21st, 1945. As the German push was halted in the Bulge, the 4th Infantry Division resumed the attack and continued the pursuit through the Siegfried Line. So they were going back to where they had been before. It was the same location that they had crossed in September, and they fought across Germany as the war ground on in the first 4 months of 1944. This map shows kind of where they were from D-Day on. So here's Utah Beach. They make their way here. Here's Utah Beach. Here's Cherbourg. They come back to Paris. They head up to Belgium. And then the Battle of Hürtgen Forest. I'm not sure where that was. Here's Germany. Here's the Hürtgen Forest right here. And then they went to, they ended up in Germany. And then I think they made their way back after that. But, so they were in constant contact with the enemy. Okay. I thought it'd be useful to put up a table of the casualties. I've seen different numbers on casualties. I'd like to think that these are pretty good numbers. So they lost over 4,000 killed, wounded over 17,000, missing in action 461, 731 prisoners of war, 299 days of combat, total battle casualties over 22,000.
So, quick question.
Sure.
So this was as of June of 1953. The MIA, that number, did that change over the years after?
You know, Howard, I don't really know. I don't know if they, you know, I think it was Barry Gerard, the son of Leo Gerard, told me that his dad was in one of the battlefields when they went back for one of the anniversaries, and he found the jawbone of a soldier. So I don't know what happened to the one. You know, somebody might have the answer here, but I don't know. You got me. But yeah, you're right. This is from '53.
Question?
Yeah.
What's the size of a division?
Good question. I know the companies were 225 men. Do you know?
14,200
14,000. Was that for the 4th Infantry Division?
for all American Infantry Division.
They're all.
Say that number again.
14,200 approximately.
Okay.
10 companies to a regiment,
Okay.
and then usually about 3
Okay.
regiments to a division.
All right. 10 companies. All right. And if each company had 225 men, and then, as my dad said, he goes, we had so many replacements. We started out with 225 men. One of the things I asked my dad in the interviews was, I said, Dad, of the original 225 men that you cooked for and were with you in the United States, how many made it back? How many were not casualties or killed in action? He said, Bruce, of the original 225 men, and he says, I'm not counting all the replacements that we went through, 19 men came back. And I was one of them. And he says, I think most of those 19 were my cooks. So, yeah. I mean, I'm lucky to be here today. My dad made it through the war, which is unbelievable. I found this online. Let me read this. No other World War II Allied unit surpassed the 4th Infantry Division's exceptionally high 252.3% casualty turnover rate, making it the U.S. infantry division with the highest mortality and casualty rate in the European theater of operations. This means the 4th Infantry Division suffered casualties equivalent to more than twice its total strength, a mark unique among U.S. ground combat divisions in Europe during World War II. Many other divisions had high casualty rates, but 4ID stands out as the deadliest in terms of mortality rate relative to size and duration of combat. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, I uncovered this during research. I knew they had I didn't know they had the highest mortality and casualty rate, but I don't think my dad knew that. You know, my dad died in 1990. When he died, nobody was using the internet. You couldn't really readily get this kind of information unless you went to a library and searched pretty hard. So I don't think he really knew that his unit lost more men than any other unit.
It makes sense, though, because they were there the longest. They were the first guys to hit the ground.
They were the first ones to hit the ground. They were there the longest, and they were in constant combat, and they were not spending much time in rest and relaxation. They were, yeah.
You take the 10th Mountain Division, they didn't arrive in Europe until January of 1945. So,
Okay, and that's pretty late.
yeah, they were the last
That,
division.
okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting to know.
Well, yeah, they start over college, Utah Beach. I'm sorry, I said they start on Utah
Right,
Beach.
they were there. They were the first guys to step on the continent.
Okay, so so the war's over in Europe. They sail back to New York. They land on July 11th. I don't know if my dad was on that ship. I love the photo caption. I got this from one of my dad's books. It says, "Things are a little crowded, but it was a trip none would have missed." So, but I'm pretty sure my dad came back with these guys. And my dad told me, he said, Truman had told us, okay, the war's over in Europe, but it's not over in Japan. So we're sending you back to the States. You're going to get a little rest and relaxation, a little R&R, spend some time with your family, and then we're going to put you on a troop ship to the West Coast, and we're going to put you on a troop ship to Japan to end the war. And these guys were like, you know, I don't think they were thrilled about it. It was like, but these guys were really tough. You know, bring it on. But anyway, my dad was discharged.
Were they the first to leave Europe? Because they were there the longest?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I couldn't tell you. Yeah, no idea.
There was a point system back in those days,
I would think they had the most points.
and they probably had the most.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised they did have the most points. Yeah. So here's the medals. I thought I'd just do a little table on that. 3 medals of honor. Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Service Medal. I know, I didn't compare this to any other unit, but it seems pretty high to me.
Purple Heart?
What?
Purple Heart?
You know, it was countless. And we'll talk a little bit about the guys that my dad fought with. Okay, I really want to talk about my dad's cooking, because I know if my dad was here today, if he's looking down, he's going, Dad, he's going, Bruce, tell him about Dad's cooking. So when I interviewed him in the 1980s, Dad told me, he says, I cooked for about 225 men, and I fed my men very, very well. I never knew it was going to be a soldier's last meal. With as many men as they lost, he knew this could be the last meal this guy gets. He says, I was going to make sure my kitchen was going to make the very best meals we could with what we had on the war front. And my dad was known for having the best coffee and mess kitchen in the whole 4th Infantry Division, and maybe the entire Army in World War II. And my father was a very humble guy. He didn't brag. He didn't, like I said, he didn't make stuff up. So my father never told me that. So how do I know that? After my dad died, I went to these reunions with a microphone and videotape, and I interviewed these guys in his unit. And they said, we knew your dad had the best food because all the commanding officers would show up in his mess kitchen first thing in the morning. They smelled his coffee, and they were there. And he had a reputation for the best food. So, so what my dad said, and I'm quoting here. The dad said, I was able to get 2 meals out of 1 ration of meat because I didn't waste an ounce of meat. I would take all my better cuts and accumulate them. I would use the undesirable cuts to make hamburgers with, but I held back enough meat to make steaks or roast beefs, which the men really enjoyed. I served the men a steak as big as a plate. And every time I served steak, they had French fried potatoes with it. Dad was the first person to introduce me to the concept of customer service. When I was a child, this is what he told me. He said, at times we had eggs on the menu. Most Army kitchens would come down about 4 o'clock in the morning and make a batch of scrambled eggs to serve at 6 o'clock a.m. By the time they got to eat the scrambled eggs, they were as cold and as hard as rock. I never made scrambled eggs. I used to cook my men's eggs to order. The men used to come in. I had 2 griddles going, and these men got their eggs the way they wanted them. If they wanted them well done, he got one of his cooks to stand out and take their order. If they wanted them well done, they got them well done. If they wanted them over light, they got them over light. However they wanted it, that's the way they got it in my kitchen. My men ate really good, and I was proud of myself. We gave them cold cereal with eggs, individual boxes of cereal. We had bacon, sometimes sausage, and coffee, toast. I had a pretty good full breakfast, and they liked hotcakes, pancakes. Most kitchens only made pancakes on Sunday because most men didn't come down for breakfast that day. But at least twice a week, I would give them pancakes, which was a lot of work for a company of 225 men. And we didn't make them in advance, like most kitchens. They would come in at 4 o'clock, start making the pancakes, put them in a pot. By the time the men got them, they were cold. That's what the other kitchens did. My kitchen made the pancakes to order right as the men came in, so they would be hot. We kept them going hot right through the whole breakfast. They got them hot right off the griddle, which the men enjoyed very much. My father once told me that he'd get sides of veal. He said the easiest thing for Army kitchens to do was take the side of veal, cut the veal into small cubes, put it in a pot, make veal stew, and then just serve the men, slop veal stew out. My father said, not my kitchen. My kitchen, we get those sides of veal. I showed my cooks how to slice the veal into cutlets and then to bread them, fry them as veal cutlets. Because, boy, did my men like that. And then one of the Elk Infantry veterans, when I interviewed him, he said, because, yeah, we were out in France, and I saw a deer. I shot the deer, and I dragged it back, and your dad, butchered it, and we had venison. And they were thrilled with having venison on the front. Another L Company man said, he goes, we're on a long march in Germany. He goes, this would happen often. We'd be on a long march, and then we'd go for like 20 miles in one day. We'd come to the end of the march, we'd be really tired. Then your dad and his cooks would pull up with their trucks and their trailers, and they'd serve us cinnamon buns. And he said, we went wild. No one else got cinnamon buns at the end of their marches. And so my dad, he knew what they wanted, and he liked to bake, and he went the extra mile to go to baking school. So I asked my dad, I said, Dad, what was the best meal that you remember cooking over there? And his response was, they were all best meals. I didn't make any very unusual dishes because we didn't have the rations for that. But whatever we did make, we made well. I didn't do any gourmet cooking, but I made sure they were all well-balanced meals. I prepared plain and simple American food and it was made the way they liked it, the way Mama used to make it at home. My kitchen and cooks were just behind the front lines because whenever possible, we would feed the men a hot meal. We used to bring it right up to the front lines. I didn't make any very unusual dishes because we didn't have the rations for that. But whatever we did make, we made well. Blah, 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 blah. says the men liked roast beef, so I used to make a lot of roast beef. And then I asked Dad about his cooking crew. You know, who are these people that cook for you? And my dad said, most mess sergeants and cooks wanted to do it the easiest way they could with the least amount of work. I had cooks just like myself. Otherwise, I didn't want them. I had cooks that didn't mind working a little harder. They knew the men were satisfied. That's the way they did it. I didn't select my own cooks. But the company commander used to send me men, and if I liked the way they worked, they stayed. If not, I got rid of them. They'd go back to the line company, back to being a rifleman or whatever job was available for them. Whoever I had enjoyed doing it. They wanted to do it. If I had someone who wanted to do it just to get out of being on the front, being on, fighting hand-to-hand combat with the Nazis, I got rid of them right away. So I set up my own crew. And he said I had about 6 working for me in the kitchen, 2 shifts, and then he kind of describes what that was all about. I got to get moving here. I'm already an hour into this.
What did your dad do after he got out of the Army?
I'll tell you. Well, the main thing was he went back to being a butcher, and I'll fill you in later. Yeah, hang on. Okay, this is my dad's thing. He was so proud of this. He said, Bruce, I think I was the first military unit on the front, first Army kitchen, to serve donuts on the front. He says it was tough to do. He said we made these baking powder donuts, covered them with sugar and cinnamon. Every chance I do this, not as a meal, but as a snack. And the men used to really enjoy that. And it was better than what the Red Cross would make. And I don't doubt it. My dad said it was true. So he tried to give him a baked good at every meal. And that's something that they certainly weren't used to. Okay. One thing I didn't talk about that I think is important is very soon after my dad died, I interviewed men to L Company, and they shared a lot of stories about my dad. But one of the things they said was that my dad was designated by the company commanders as a kitchen to serve as a temporary haven for men who were suffering from battle fatigue and shell shock. As you can imagine, based on what I just described, a lot of these guys just being on the front, and it was hard to take. So the company commander would come to my dad and say, Kirschner, I want to put this guy in your kitchen. Just have him peel potatoes. Just get him out of the line of fire. Keep him here until he gets his head back, and if he's ready to go back to the front, we'll do that. So my dad would take care of these guys. And my dad was like a tough New York City street kid, had a very gruff exterior, but deep down, I think my dad really had a heart of gold. They had a lot of compassion for these guys, and he really took good care of them in his kitchen. So the guys that I met that spent time in his kitchen in that context were indebted to my dad for what he did for them for the rest of his life, rest of their lives. My dad would frequently talk about his company commander. He never told me his name. I never found out his name till later. But I found out his name was Captain John Record. My father loved this guy. He's the guy that made my dad the mess sergeant. And I knew that my dad really admired this guy. My dad said, quote, he was a good man, always worried about everybody getting down, and he himself got hit. Apparently, in the battle for Cherbourg, he was directing a tank, and he was shot in the head by a German sniper about 2 weeks after D-Day. And this guy was an incredible fighting machine, which I'll show you in a minute. But it was a big loss to my dad when he passed away. Okay, here's his Distinguished Service Cross citation, which he got this posthumously after he died. It's too small to read, but what I like to do, I think it's important enough to read it up here. From D-Day on June 6, 1944 until June 10th, 1944, Captain John Record, company commander of Company L, 8th Infantry, displayed extraordinary heroism and outstanding qualities of leadership, initiative, and skill which set him above and apart from his brother officers and enlisted men under his command. On June 6, 1944, he personally led his men across a hostile fortified beach, which was under heavy concentration of artillery, machine gun, and rocket fire. Moving quickly inland, he reorganized his company under fire and moved further inland to assault his company objective without loss of life to his personnel. Personally leading his men in the assault and seizure of Saint-Marie-du-Mont, France, he drove the enemy out of town and secured the uninterrupted advance of following troops. He then established contact with a parachute unit which had landed behind the enemy prior to H hour, and in the course of this operation, personally killed 6 of the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Okay. Says, on June 7th, 1944, Captain Record personally led his company in an assault of a fortified zone in Foosville and destroyed all opposition by means of supporting fires, maneuver, and hand-to-hand combat. In this phase of operations, he rescued 1 officer and 12 enlisted men from a parachute unit who had been captives of the Germans, and in so doing, he and his men personally killed 110 Germans and captured 70. Pretty good for a day's work. On June 8, 1944, Captain Record personally led his company in an attack on a heavily fortified enemy ridge, driving out a number of snipers and effecting the capture of several machine gun nests, an action in which 10 of the enemy were killed and 5 captured. On June 9, 1944, Captain Record personally led his company in an attack against a machine gun nest and an 88 millimeter gun, which was located in such a position as to seriously impede the advance of his company and his entire battalion, killing 27 Germans and capturing 1. And the last slide here. On June 10, 1944, Captain Record personally led his company across 500 yards of open ground through a thick barrage of artillery and rocket fire without loss of life, a feat accomplished by moving from one position to another under heavy fire, directing his troops in their advance, which brought his unit to the core objectives. At all times during these 5 days, Captain Record was in front of his troops, moving from one position to another under the most dangerous circumstances, encouraging the individual men in his company with complete disregard for his own safety. And then, as I told you, he was shot just a couple of weeks later on June 23rd in the battle for Cherbourg, and that was the end. During my dad's life, I got to meet a number of men of L Company, and one of them was Ed Schull, Sergeant Ed Schull, from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And this guy, Ed Schull, we spent a lot of time with. My family would go to Bethlehem. We'd go down and visit his wife Doris and his son Jack, and then he would come up and spend time with us, and saw him a lot. And when I did my interviews with my dad many years later, because I had known him from my earliest memories, Ed Schull, I said, Dad, what was the story with your friendship with Ed Schull? And my dad said, Ed was a platoon leader, and he lost his whole platoon. He was the sole survivor of the platoon. And the company commander said, we got to get Schull out of the line of fire. He's suffering from battle fatigue. Can I put him in your kitchen? So Ed spent time in my dad's kitchen. And during the war, when he was in the kitchen, Ed's father passed away in the States, and he had no money to go back. And my dad loaned him money. He said, just take this money, go to your father's funeral. So he came back to the States, and then he came back to the front. But I think he was always indebted to my dad for doing what he did for him. But when I was doing research on my dad after he died, I contacted all the men of L Company that I knew, including Ed Schull, and I said, could you tell me, more about the war and my dad? And Doris, Ed's wife, wrote me a letter, and she said, to tell you the truth, Bruce, Ed never talked much about his service career. It was only through Leo Brislin, after we married, that I knew Ed had a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his wounds. And this guy, Leo Brislin, was an L Company veteran who lost his leg. He had one leg. He lost it in combat. And then later, Ed wrote me a letter himself that I'd like to share with you. Because I just read it. I'd forgotten he had sent this to me, and I just ran across it last week. It says, Dear Bruce, war is hell, and that's what you got in this picture. He was talking about Saving Private Ryan, the Steven Spielberg movie was just released. He says, that's what you got in this picture, and then some. I don't want to see it because it will bring back too many memories. The plot isn't what is important. It's showing the people. That's what it's all about. Blood, shells, screams, misery, and the look on men's faces of fear as they call out to their mothers. It isn't a pretty picture, but why did it take so long to show people the real thing with this film? The Hollywood-style movie was a lot of bullshit with only one hero. To me, anyone in World War II was a hero. I've done a lot of reading after the war, and you'd be amazed at some of the dumb planning that took so many lives. The big shots never took the blame for anything that would hurt their prestige. They should have dumped them in the front lines. The German soldiers went through it too, more so, because of that nitwit who thought he could rule the world. How could one man control so many people is beyond me. I just hope and pray that there won't be another conflict, because with the weapons we have today, any conflict that would then escalate to war would last an hour. He wrote this to me in 1998, by the way. Our being a mile and a half off course helped our landing on Utah Beach and saved many, many lives. Unfortunately, they got to us inland. We were the green troops. The Germans were veterans who knew our every move. They had years to prepare, and they took advantage of us because of that. The German was a good soldier, but they felt the same way we did. Why are we fighting? Whom are we fighting for? Did that war solve anything? I think not, because there will always be someone who will want to try it again. The other two, Korea and Vietnam, were supposed to be holding actions, but why did so many young men lose their lives and limbs? When it did end and they got home, they got nothing. No matter how you look at it, it's a cruel world. So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was a poignant letter from Ed, and I just wanted to share that. Okay, Leo Jarrett. I mentioned him earlier. He was from Beaverdale, Pennsylvania. Entered the Army in 1941. Trained stateside with my father until they sailed for England in January '44. He celebrated his 24th birthday in Honington, Devonshire, where they were training. And he remembered, he had an account of his war experience, and I pulled this out. He remembered the pre-Normandy invasion briefing by Colonel James Van Fleet, who was the 8th Infantry Division commanding officer. And in Leo's words, he said, then one day reality set in. All the officers walked in circles around the building for as far as you can see. It was evident that dry runs were a thing of the past, and a rigid quarantine confirmed that. The 8th Regiment was to be the assault regiment at Utah Beach in the invasion, and my company was to hit the beach at H hour plus 45 minutes. He was one of the first assault units to land on the beach. Here's a picture of Leo with a machine gun. Leo was struck by German machine gun fire on June 23rd, 1944, in the battle for Cherbourg. It was the same day that Captain Record was killed. Brian, Leo's son told me that they carried him into a barn and then somehow got him to the beach where they operated and saved Leo's life. Brian went on with his dad to the spot where it happened during a trip for the 50th D-Day anniversary. Brian told me, he said, the L Company's foxholes were still evident in the field 50 years later. This is like, what, 1995. The fields, their foxholes are still evident, and it was a barn with a blue slate roof, which stands at one end of the field, just like it did in 1944. Some Frenchmen who were teenagers at the time remembered the firefight and took us to the exact spot where my father was shot. This guy, Amos Johnson, they called him Jeep Johnson because he was the company commander's Jeep driver. He was a 6'3" farmer from Wisconsin. He won the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and Distinguished Service Cross, and he knew my father very, very well. At a 4th Infantry National Reunion soon after my father passed away, Amos began to tell me about a specific incident that happened that deeply affected the men of L Company and my father. It was one that I never heard about. And Amos started to tell me this story, and he choked up, and he started to cry, couldn't talk, and he said, I'll write you a letter, and I'll tell you what happened. So a few weeks later, I got the letter. In fact, I found the letter. This is the letter from Amos, and this is what he said. He said, in regards to your father, I feel the one reason it was hard for him to talk about the war was that he was so close to everyone as the mess sergeant. I am sure he felt like a mother to everyone, and people were killed and wounded. It was like losing one of his family. I am sure he felt like a mother image as he had to see that they were fed 3 times a day. The one time that was very hard on him was when L Company was surrounded by the enemy for 2 days. We had to fight our way out, and we had no food for those 2 days. When we got free of the enemy, your father was bringing the food to us. The Jeep, the Jeep with the food, was a trailer with a trailer behind, had the food, and they pulled up in an open field where they were to feed us. The Jeep ran over a tank mine and blew up our dinner, including our Jeep driver and first sergeant. This must have been very hard on your father, as he would have been very close to both men. And then he said, hopes that sheds some light. So this really broke up these guys. And my dad never talked about what had happened. Okay, so Amos won these awards. Okay, some other notable guys. These are other notable members. First was, I told you earlier about Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt Jr. He landed on the beach with these guys, with Moose Schroeder. He got off the boat. He was very cool. He had a cool ingenuity, saved numerous lives on D-Day, but he had not told his commanders that he had a heart condition. So just a few weeks after D-Day, Roosevelt died of a heart attack, and his actions on D-Day earned him a posthumous award. It was the Medal of Honor. And he's in the movie The Longest Day, he's portrayed in the movie by Henry Fonda. I haven't seen the movie in a long time, so I forgot that. This was the Major General, Raymond Barton. Ironically, he was born in Granada, Colorado, which surprised me. But what I loved about this guy, you know, not only did he command them from D-Day through Battle of the Bulge, he was in the movie The Longest Day as well, and they had somebody portray him. And at this point, when I saw it, the movie, I was still in elementary school. I knew about him from this book, and when I saw him, I got so excited to see a character. I don't know who played him in the movie, but I said, "Wow, that's cool. That's my dad's commander." J.D. Salinger. Does anybody know who J.D. Salinger is? What's his famous book? Catcher in the Rye. Catcher in the Rye. He was with their counterintelligence corps. He was in the second wave on Utah Beach. Saw intense combat, including the Battle of the Bulge and the Battle of Hurricane Forest. And he was writing Catcher in the Rye during these battles. He was writing, yeah, it said he carried parts of the Catcher in the Rye manuscript in his backpack while landing on the beaches of Normandy and continued to put pen to paper while fighting through the Hurricane Forest, scribbling between battles. The book was eventually published in 1951 when Salinger was 32 years old, and it sold 65 million copies globally. And he got friendly with Ernest Hemingway and carried on a long-term writing relationship with him. There's Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was attached to the 4th Infantry Division. He was a war correspondent during World War II, and he was involved in some intense combat with these guys, and he had a self-appointed role as a civilian scout in Paris. So he was spying on them. He was like an early guy into Paris where he had spent a lot of time earlier in the war. And in this picture, that's Raymond Barton on the left. And on the right is Colonel Robert Chance, both of the 4th Infantry Division. You know, I heard something about a Purple Heart in my dad, and I didn't know what it was about, so I asked him, and when I was doing my interview, I said, Dad, wasn't there something about a Purple Heart? And this is what he told me. This is an exact quote. He says, I could have gotten one time. I was injured in combat there, but I turned it down. I didn't want it because I wasn't shot. I was injured carrying chow up to the front. I was sitting in a trailer, which the Jeeps used to pull the chow with. It jackknifed, and I got my foot caught. It was pretty painful for a while, and I hobbled around for a couple of weeks. So they wanted to give me a Purple Heart. But it wasn't shrapnel, and I didn't deserve anything when so many other guys were really getting hurt. And that was what my father was all about, you know. He didn't deserve it, he knew it, and he just felt bad so many of his friends were getting killed. Okay, we jump forward in time. After my dad died, I started doing research about his division, and I never knew his company commander's name, but Amos Johnson had told me that his company commander's name was John Record. I found him on the internet, found out that he was buried at the American Cemetery in Normandy, but his family, he came from a military family from northeastern Maryland. They built a centograph, which is like a monument in the family cemetery for him. So I was back there for work in March of 2017. I had a 2-week gig. I was on contract to the U.S. government doing training, and I was in southern Maryland. I rented a car, drove up there. I gave the Baltimore Sun newspaper a heads up, so a reporter came, and what I didn't know was he brought this woman, Betsy Herman, who was the niece of Captain Record. Her mother was first cousin to Captain Record. She still lived in the area. And what was really interesting was this reporter. And by the way, if anyone wants this guy did a great job on this article, honoring L Company and Record. I have a copy. I have my email at the end of this. I'll email it to you, okay? He covered a really good article. But the reporter told me that Captain Record's wife was still alive, his widow. And she was in the mid-90s back then. And she contacted me at this time and said, thank you so much for going to the cemetery. And we have carried on an email relationship since then. His wife, Betty Hester, is now 104. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina. She's remarkable. She's not only completely computer literate, she's got her own Facebook page. I'm not making this up. And her mind is crystal clear, and she operates very independently. She lives in an assisted living facility, but she operates on her own. She is my role model. Here's Captain Record with his daughter before he's killed. That's Barry. She's 10 months old. She's now in her 80s. She lives in the same facility as her mom, Betty. And I told Betty, I said, Betty, I've been communicating with you for years. You are remarkable. I have to meet you. So after Labor Day this year, I flew out there. And I spent a few days with her in Charleston, South Carolina. We hung out. And there she is. What do you bring a 100-year-old woman? I didn't know what to bring her, so I figured I'll bring her a dozen roses. Doesn't she look great? Perfectly lucid. So we hung out. She now has 9 grandchildren. Let me back up a little bit. After he passed away, she's a widow. She had Barry. She remarried. Early on, she married an Army surgeon who then became an OBGYN who practiced in Charleston. Then she had 3 children. So now she has 9 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, and she keeps great track of everybody in her family. She's got like spreadsheets, you know. Anyway, Betty is watching right now. She's watching right now. God bless you, Betty. All right. Okay, so after I visited the Record Family Cemetery in Maryland, my wife and another couple went to Normandy, France on a visit, and we spent several days in Normandy. We visited the beaches and the small towns like Saint-Mère-Église, where the 4th Infantry Division broke out the American paratroopers. This is the monument they have on Utah Beach for the 4th Infantry Division. It's very nice. And then I went to the cemetery. I needed to visit the graves of some of these people. So Amos Johnson told me the names of my dad's closest friends, people that my dad never talked about. So I paid my respects to, first it was Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who my dad didn't know, but he was such an important guy. I went to visit his grave. This is the grave of Jesse Parlato, who, according to Amos Johnson, was a very, very close friend of my dad. My dad never mentioned this guy. He was a single guy from Buffalo, New York, no kids, unmarried, Italian. And my dad and him really got along, so he's buried there. So I sent my regards from my dad. And then this is me and John Record's. This is where he's actually buried. The centograph is in Joppa, and this is his real grave. So I spent some time there. Now I just want to kind of wrap up this presentation with what happened after the war with my dad. I told you that Truman wanted him to go to Japan, and then that didn't happen. My dad arrived in July. They dropped the bombs on Japan in August, and my dad was discharged on, I think it was, I forgot where in September. It was early September, soon after he got back. Here's my dad's honorable discharge papers. And so when my dad got home, first thing he found out was that his favorite older brother died of lymphoma when he was over in Europe. He was only like 32 years old. Nobody told him about it. I think my grandparents didn't want to tell my dad, their son. They didn't want to distract him. They knew he needed to be focused. So he didn't find out till he got home about that. So he went home. He went back to his parents' home, moved in, worked in my granddad's butcher shop, and I think this was the beginning of my dad's recovery from the war. This was the beginning of his mental and emotional healing process. So he bought a nightclub. He bought a nightclub in southern Brooklyn, right near Coney Island, with his oldest sister and her husband, and the third guy was a mafia guy. Makes sense. He was like, the mafia guy's name was Al Schneider. I think he was a silent partner. I think he gave money. His brother was known to run the numbers racket in all of Brooklyn. So these guys were deeply embedded in organized crime in New York City and Brooklyn at that time. And my dad even looked like a gangster, you know. And I once asked my cousin Sid, who I think may be watching from Armonk, New York now. I said, Dad, Sid, was my dad like mafia? And there's like a long pause. And Sid said, he goes, you know.
There's no Polish mafia guys.
Anyway, so they run this, and what they would do is my dad really wanted to bring soldiers back. These guys were single, right? They had been over in Europe or Japan, wherever, coming back home, New York City area. They had big bands playing, they had alcohol, dancing, all this stuff. So my dad did that for years. These guys were looking to get married, return to civilian life. And during the day, my dad worked my dad's butcher, his dad's butcher shop. And then at night, my dad worked as a bartender. Then he met my mom. She's pretty pretty, isn't she? I don't get my looks from her. They got married. They eloped in 1949, and they bought they lived in New York City for a while. I lived in Brooklyn. Then they bought a track house with the GI Bill on Long Island. So I grew up in a little town called Westbury, just east of New York City, and so yeah. But what was interesting about my dad was I was born 8 years after the war ended, and my dad was who he was. I didn't know what it was like before the war, right? So I couldn't really parse out what impacted him and what was he like before the war, but he did strange stuff. And one thing I knew is he had a very short fuse, my dad. Things would set him off. He'd piss him off. And once when I was a child, I must have been about 7, 8 years old, I'm sitting in the kitchen, and my father was mad at something. And I'm sitting there eating breakfast. Picture this. He picks up, I'm sitting on the other side. He picks up the whole table, throws it over. And it was like, what the heck was that all about? So he was addicted to cigarettes. And when my dad died, she told me that he frequently experienced nightmares. I never heard him yelling out in the night, but he'd wake up a lot and yell and wake her up. And he'd be in like a sweat. And he never told me about it. I don't think she knew what he was talking about. But it was hard for me to figure out what that was all about. How are we doing on time, Don? Doing okay? Okay, cool. All right. I don't have that much more to go, folks. So one day when I was about 8 years old, I came home from school and I said, Dad, I want to become a Boy Scout and a Cub Scout first. So I love those blue Cub Scout uniforms. And my dad got really excited. And I didn't really know why. And then later I realized he figured this is a way for me to start hanging around outside, camping, cooking outside, making coffee outside. So he became a scout leader, and he would hang out with our scouts, and he became the cooking merit badge counselor. And he would give these cooking demonstrations, and he was like in his element. He just loved being out there. And it was great, you know, and I could see it was helping him. And then in the early 1960s, he got into family camping. He started hanging out at these Army-Navy stores, buying sleeping bags. He bought a pop-up tent trailer, and we would go up and down the East Coast, and every morning my dad would be out there. He built a chuck box with all his camping pots and pans. And he'd be cooking every morning. I could smell that every morning, you know. And we were really working class, so we didn't have much money. So it kind of worked out that we camped a lot. And to this day, I do a lot of camping. I don't backpack as much, but I loved it. And my kids, my youngest son was an Eagle Scout. still does a lot of camping. So it kind of set a precedent. I've got the number 10 can here. One of the things that he loved to do is if he, and I was talking to Dave about this, my father would collect these and he would show the scouts, if you open up the top and ventilate it, and you ventilate the bottom, you put a little, on the bottom, a little kind of metal grate, and a grate on top to put the food. If you put like twigs or charcoal or whatever you could make to burn, this becomes a little camping stove. And the kids loved it. And to this day, in fact, some of these guys may be watching, they still talk about this number 10 can. And they always joke about my dad. You go, yeah, your dad say, well, you take a number 10 can. And he'd walk them through how to build this. They never forgot my dad doing that. So I think this is good for my dad. Here's me and my dad in Florida, 68. We're doing family camping. Yeah, during the Cold War, my dad, he was kind of politically, he was a moderate. He really believed in the domino theory. You know what domino theory is? Okay, he believed that. And he really believed the American military was doing the right thing. But then later in Vietnam, and even early in Vietnam, he says, yeah, we got to be there, we got to do this. But later on, I think he realized this is not good. Too many of our men, he really felt, you know, his heart for the men that we were losing in Vietnam. And he said, Bruce, I think we got to get out of there. I'm not happy about all our men dying there. I don't know what this is doing. So he turned against the war later on. I read this book by one of my high school friends. In fact, Don, if you're watching now, one of my high school friends who lived in the Upper East Side of New York City told me about this book a few months ago by David Nasaw. It's called The Wounded Generation. And this quote really captures my dad. They suffered in silence. They talked about the war only brought to surface memories they wanted to bury. And what would be gained by burdening those who hadn't been to the war with images they needed to erase? They did not speak of the deaths that haunted them. When they got out, you couldn't talk about things like that. You held it all in. I didn't want to take it to my family. If you'd say anything, people wouldn't believe half of what you'd say anyway. And that's exactly what my dad was about. Didn't talk it. I mean, there's a lot of gory stuff. Saw a lot of dead people, Germans and Americans, a lot of blood and guts. Never came up. And recently I've been in touch with the son of Ed Schultz, Jack. And he said, Bruce, when I was like 8 years old, your father, my father, would be talking to his dad and Leo Brislin, the man who lost his leg. And he would give a signal, my father would give a signal to the other guys. Stop, don't talk, my son's coming in. So they protected us from hearing all this stuff. But when it's together, they were reliving all this stuff. And they just didn't want us to know about it. Here's my parents at oh, it's not a picture. Next one's a picture. My dad went to his first 4th Infantry Division reunion in Colorado Springs in 1976. And I was doing a cross-country trip, going camping through the national parks that summer. I was in my early 20s. And they said, why don't you come by, you know, and spend time with us? So I did that. I went there. And when I got there, my mom said, she said, when we first got here, your father looked at the registrar of who was here. Because they had never been to a reunion. He had never seen these guys since the war. And he said, I don't think anybody from my company is here. So they went up to their room. And there was a knock at the door. And Leo Jerub and probably 4 or 5 guys from L Company come in, and they said something like, "Where's the mess? Where's our donuts?" You know. And my father and them, once they realized who they were, they all broke down and cried. And I wasn't there. I didn't witness this, but I never saw my father cry. But I think what was going through these guys' minds as they were crying together in this little hotel room was it the fact that they were still alive, but they made it through. They knew they were one of the few guys in their unit to make it through. It was very poignant when my mom told me that story. Here's another reunion. This was in Augusta, and it was a national reunion, Augusta, Georgia, in I think 1980. And this is all the men of all the survivors that made it to this. And that's my mother, and that's my father. Also, he's still got one of the biggest smiles, of anybody here, But and all these other guys. I think that's Leo Jerub. This is one of my dad's cooks. That's Garner Cook from Tennessee. And when I interviewed these guys, Garner came over to me alone, and he said he started crying. He was in his 60s then. He started crying, and he said, "Bruce, your father saved my life. If I wasn't a cook for your father, and he didn't have me in his kitchen, I wouldn't have survived." Ironically, his last name was Cook. So they called him Cookie. That was his name. Okay.
Well, Bruce, I think we're going to...
You think we're done?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave it at that point if you're okay.
Okay. Let's go. All right. I got a few. Oh, yeah. Let me just 1 minute.
Sure.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay. In this book here, there's an excerpt of the interviews I did with my dad. This is a monument that was constructed at the entrance to Arlington National Cemetery. I helped raise money for this. Some of my friends in this room back here, did a 215-mile bike ride from Telluride to Moab in 2000 to raise money. It was a pledge drive. And Dave Swanson and Steve Hager here, they did that with me. But I raised almost $2,000 to help build this. And I was there for the dedication. This is a race I went to in Army 10 Mile, very big race, October 2015. Out of 344 men in the 60 to 64 age group, I came in second. I ran a 6 minute 46 pace per mile to 10 mile. And this is the very end. I was in England in 2017, and it was a bring the Yanks back. The Yanks are back in Saddleworth, and it was a reenactment of the Yanks training in 1944. They had all the Army equipment, and these young British guys dressed up in World War II uniforms. And they also had an exhibit where they had food. And I told them about my dad serving cinnamon buns and donuts on the front. And one of the guys came over to me and he said, "I have this can from World War II, never opened. It's cinnamon nut roll. You can have it." Does anyone want to share this with me now? Does anyone have a can opener? So that's it, folks. All right. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. Yeah. This bolo tie with the insignia was my father's. And when he died, my mother said, "Bruce, you should have this." So I want to wear it today.
And the other thing is that being a butcher, he sure was handy when that venison came into the cook camp.
He knew his meat, and one thing I didn't tell you is he asked me what my dad did after the war. He ran this butcher shop from when I was born till like 1968, and then he took a test to New York State needed meat inspectors. So they were starting a whole new division. He scored second highest in the state on this test about meat. So they hired him, and he became like a meat and poultry inspector. He would go to duck farms on eastern Long Island and inspect ducks, and he did that. So, yeah, that's kind of what he did.
Other questions?
I would think that he would come back and be a restaurateur and open a restaurant.
You know,
Well, he opened a nightclub, right?
my dad, he loved food service, but it was day and night work. You know, that kind of work. And in my life, I have to tell you, watching my father's family and my mother's family. My mother's father owned grocery stores in Harlem, New York. And they worked so hard, so many hours. And even being a waiter was not something I ever wanted to do. I can't remember orders. I can't do that. I can't do that stuff in my head, even when I was young. So I avoided all that. So I don't think my dad wanted to have anything to do with it. He had a government job doing meat inspection. I'm sure he did a great job. But restaurants, it's tough business. It's a tough way to make a living.
Okay, a few more questions, and then I'll let you guys come
Yeah.
up here individually.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'm curious, do you have a sense of how often, like, infantrymen got to have meals, cooked meals versus, like, sea rations when they were, you know, more, I guess, maybe closer to fighting or something? Like, was it mostly eating in your father's settings, or was, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious
Okay.
about that.
Good. Yeah. You're like me, you know, on non-military. When they hit the beach, they had K rations, okay? And when they were moving quickly, they were carrying food. It wasn't until later when my dad caught up to them. Once he caught up to them, which was probably a week or two after D-Day, he was with them close by. So he was with them. So they were on the front. He was right behind them. And he told me, he said, we wanted to be close, but not too close. So he was feeding them all the time, probably as soon as he caught up to them. And they had hot meals every day. And one of the things I asked my dad was, hey, Dad, was your kitchen ever blown up? Because you were so close in. He says, we were lucky. He said a lot of the kitchens did get blown up, but not mine. So, yeah. So they had warm food with my dad through the end of the war. And it sounded like the supply line was never interrupted.
Here's a question here.
Yeah, just I don't know if any of you knew, from last time they talked about Nuremberg. Your letter there asked how people managed to do this. This book, my daughter got the original information from the Holocaust Museum that Doug Kelly wrote. This book is out of print, but my daughter transcribed it. And if you are interested in reading this book, this is the most amazing book in the world. It answers the question. And if you talk to me, I'll tell you, my daughter can send you the PDF.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
And as some of you know, we had our own resident historian, Flint Whitlock, talk about the Nuremberg trials.
That's why we did this.
Yeah, last month. So thank you. Let's take one more question if we have one more out there. Somebody? Anyone? All right. Well, once again, I'd like you to give a hand to Bruce.
Thank you.
And as a little token of our appreciation for speaking, we have this coin for you from the
Oh, nice.
Broomfield Veterans Museum. Thank you so much, Bruce.
yeah, thank you.
Folks, don't forget that we have the questionnaires up here. I would really appreciate if you come up, fill one of those out, drop it off in this box before you leave, or if you want to come up and talk to Bruce individually, that'd be okay, right, Bruce?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you
I'll
for
stick
coming
around.
today, folks. Have a good day.
Thank you, folks. Enjoy this great museum. Go upstairs. Jeff.
That was very enlightening to me.
Good. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Welcome.